Hi, everyone. Welcome to Selling to Healthcare. I'm Lisa Miller. I've been in and around hospital operations for over 25 years, selling, consulting, building, and running my own company. And now I'm helping companies figure out how to actually get in front of hospital executives and win. So today I want to talk about probably the single most common frustration that I hear from sales leaders and from individual contributors. And it's this: I can't get a meeting with the C-suite. I've called, I've emailed, I've followed up, and, nothing is working. And I hear this every single week. It comes from reps selling clinical products, capital equipment, services, software, consulting. It comes from founders trying to close enterprise health systems. And it comes from, seasoned account executives who've been hitting quota for years and suddenly they just can't crack a specific account. So let me just put a stake in the ground here, because I think this is the foundation of everything I teach about selling to hospitals. Access is earned, it's never expected. And I think that one sentence, if you really let it in, will change the way you build your pipeline. Because the frustration most sellers carry is built on this quiet assumption, right? That outreach should be enough. That because you sent a thoughtful email, or you left a polite voicemail, or you made a LinkedIn connection, that a meeting should follow. And it won't. And, honestly, it shouldn't. Hospital executives aren't withholding meetings because they're difficult, right? They're withholding meetings because there aren't enough hours in their day to take one that doesn't move their priorities forward. The CFO has a multi-billion-dollar budget, payer negotiations, capital decisions in motion, a board to answer to. The COO is solving for throughput and labor. The CMO is balancing quality, safety, and physician relationships. And, none of them owe you their time. They'll give it to you if and only if you've earned it. So the question becomes really simple, and it's the one I want you to sit with. What does value actually look like, defined from their seat, not yours? So let me talk about why the word value has, quietly stopped meaning value in healthcare sales, because I think this is really, really where a lot of teams are getting it wrong. Most sales training in our industry teaches you to lead with the same three buckets, right? Reduce cost, increase revenue, reduce risk. And those are true, but they're also, at this point, they're generic. And I think the most common move I see reps make in the name of value is sending a case study. And look, I love a good case study. They have their place, but pause and think about it from the executive side of the table. Right now, this week, that executive's inbox is full of case studies, right? Every rep is sending one. And when everyone leads with the same proof point, the proof point stops working. And worse, a generic case study sent cold signals, something the sender probably doesn't intend to communicate. It signals that the conversation is about the vendor, not the executive. It's transactional, and the executive can feel it. So if generic case studies and broad ROI claims and, templated outreach aren't the path, then what is? So I'm going to share 3 out of the 8 strategies that I coach my clients on, and I want to take them one at a time. So strategy 1 is lead with a unique insight about their hospital, not your solution. And this is the strategy, that separates the rep who gets the meeting from the rep who just keeps following up. And a unique insight isn't a stat you pulled from Google or, a generative AI summary of the industry. It's your own thinking applied specifically to the hospital you're trying to reach, drawing on data and experience the executive themselves may not have stitched together. So let me give you a concrete example. Say your service is operational improvement in the OR. The generic version of your pitch is, we help hospitals improve OR throughput and our clients have seen meaningful gains. That gets a polite no. Now compare that to this. You pull the executive's Medicare cost report. You go into surgical line profitability by DRG. You look at DRG 470 or DRG 475. Then you cross-reference against 2 other publicly available data sets, and you build a 1-page executive brief that says, based on 3 publicly reported data points, here's what we're seeing inside your DRG 475 profile. Here are the 3 areas with the most room to improve, and here's what that improvement is plausibly worth. And I want to walk you through, specifically what I mean by this, because I think this is where it gets really, really practical and so important. So there are 3 publicly available data sets that you can, put together to build this kind of brief. And when you combine them, you're moving the conversation from a vendor pitch to a peer-level financial review. So the first one is the Medicare cost report, right? It's in a system called HCRIS. And every Medicare certified hospital submits one of these annually as the foundational document for understanding a hospital's true cost structure, beyond what they charge. And there are a few key worksheets you really want to pay attention to here. So for instance, worksheet A is where you see their expenses mapped out to specific cost centers like the operating room, medical supplies, and implantable devices. Then worksheet C, part 1, I think this is probably the most important one because it gives you the cost to charge ratio for each department. So you can actually take what a hospital charges and, back into what it really costs them. Worksheet D1 is your routine care cost per diem. So your med-surg beds, your ICU beds. And when you layer that onto length of stay for a specific DRG, you can estimate the room and board piece of the equation. The second data set is the CMS IPPS final rule tables that come out every year. And these are really important because they give you the payment parameters for every DRG. So each DRG has a relative weight that reflects, the average resources required to treat patients in that group. And when you multiply that by the hospital's base payment rate, you get the base reimbursement. And then they also publish the geometric mean length of stay for each DRG nationally, right? So if your target hospital's average length of stay for DRG 470 is, say, 3.5 days, but the national benchmark is 2.2 days, that variance represents a real measurable margin leak. And that's the kind of thing that gets a CFO's attention. Now, the third data set is MedPAR, which is the Medicare Provider Analysis and Review file. And this has, claim level data for all Medicare Part A inpatient discharges. So you can pull hospital-specific performance metrics by DRG, like what they're billing on average, what they're actually getting reimbursed, and what their actual average length of stay is for a specific procedure. So here's how you connect the dots, right? You take the average Medicare payment for that DRG from MedPAR, that's your revenue number. Then you take the hospital's average total charges, also from MedPAR, and you apply the cost to charge ratios from the cost report to estimate the true cost of the case. And here's a pro tip. For orthopedic and spinal procedures in particular, you want to isolate the implant charges and apply the specific cost to charge ratio for implantable devices because that often reveals that high implant costs are just destroying the margin on those cases. Then you subtract estimated costs from average payment and you've got your margin estimate. And then you compare that against the national averages from the IPPS tables and, you can see exactly where the variance is. And what you end up with is a one-page executive brief that you can send directly to a hospital, CFO, or VP of finance. And it uses their own data, right? So you're showing them, look, your cost to charge ratio for implantable devices is this, which means your estimated implant cost per case is this much higher than the regional average. And that suggests an immediate opportunity for vendor contract renegotiation or physician preference item standardization. Or you're showing them, your average length of stay for this DRG is this many days above the CMS benchmark. And when you multiply that variance by your routine per diem cost, that's an excess cost of this much per discharge. And then you add up the bottom line impact if they just close the gap to the 50th percentile in a couple of areas. And, you're talking about real money on Medicare volume alone. That's not a pitch. That's consulting. And it gives the executive something that, none of your competitors are giving them, which is thinking that's specific to their hospital. And I hear the objection all the time, right? Like if I give it away, they'll take the brief and ignore me. And I always say, first of all, they're already ignoring you, right? So the downside is zero. But second, they won't. Their reaction is going to be the opposite, right? They're going to think, if this is what they put in a one-page brief, I didn't even ask for, what would they bring to a working conversation? What would they bring as my advisor? What would they bring if I were actually using their product or service? And that's the line of thought that opens the calendar. So strategy 2 is publish original content that only you could have written. And the second way to earn access is to be visible in the market with original thinking that, no one else can replicate. And I'm not talking about a fluffy blog post that any AI tool could generate in 90 seconds. I'm talking about real intellectual work, like a quarterly industry review on a topic you own, a point of view on a CMS policy shift with the implications spelled out, an original research piece pulled from your customer interviews and your team's collective field intelligence. And I think the test is simple, right? Could a generalist sit down and produce the same piece in an afternoon? If the answer is yes, you haven't built a moat. The piece you want to produce is the one where the answer is no, right? It's the piece that, authorities and associations start citing because it's the the clearest explanation of a problem they've all been trying to name. It's the piece an executive forwards to a colleague and says, I want us to think about this. And that kind of content, it earns access on autopilot because executives reach out to the author. You become a known voice on a specific topic, and the meeting requests start coming the other direction. So strategy 3, and this one's more tactical, is show up differently in how you reach out, and it amplifies the first 2. Most outreach look identical, right? Same templated emails, same LinkedIn message, same cadence. So when something different lands in the executive's inbox, they really notice. So a short video is one way to do this, like 30 seconds looking into the camera. I put together a 1-page brief specific to your hospital and your surgical service line. I'd like to send it over. Would that be useful? And that's a very different ask than, do you have 15 minutes next week, right? You're not asking for time. You're offering value and asking permission to deliver it. Another version is, a no-charge executive brief delivered to the team. 30 minutes on a specific topic that matters to them, no pitch attached. And hospitals appreciate this when the content is genuinely useful, and it gives you a chance to meet the team in a low-pressure setting where you're the one giving, not asking. And one more variation that I think works really well, send the executive a piece of original content you've written and ask for their feedback. Not a pitch, a genuine ask. Like, I put this together and I really value your perspective. Is there anything you'd add or change or push back on? And, executives respect people who are willing to be edited, and it positions you as a peer, not a vendor. And in all 3 of those tactics, the through line is the same, right? You're not asking for access. You're demonstrating in advance and in concrete form the kind of value you'd bring once the relationship existed. So let me zoom out for a second, because I think this is really, really important context. Mark Benioff has said for years that every meaningful enterprise deal Salesforce closed in its early growth years involved the CEO, not procurement, not the line manager, but the CEO. And that's not a vanity statistic, right? It's a discipline. Salesforce built a motion that earned that level of access on every important deal. And you can build the same motion, right? It doesn't replace what you already use. If your team runs Challenger, Medic, Miller Hyman, keep them, they're good. But layer on top of them a C-suite selling discipline that treats access as something earned through unique insight, original content, and differentiated outreach. Because I think that's the missing layer. When my clients install it, the results aren't incremental, they're material. So the next time you feel the frustration of a quiet inbox, don't ask why they're not responding. Ask the harder question, what have I given them that would make a response inevitable? That's where the work is, and that's where the meetings are. And, if you want to have a conversation about building a stronger C-suite strategy inside your company, you can reach me directly. There's a link in the show notes, or you can email me at lisa@lisatmiller.com. And, I wrote a longer companion piece on this topic with the full data methodology and an executive brief template, and you can find that linked in the show notes as well. All right, that's it for today's episode of Selling to Healthcare. I'm Lisa Miller, and I'll be back next week with more strategies to help you sell smarter and stand out.